created a survey on the channel and asked a question: do you believe that hell is a place of eternal torment? And the result wasn't surprising. About 57% said yes, and 43% said no. So the majority believe that hell is a place of eternal torment. Now, I want those individuals to watch the videos that I created on that topic, but I'll reiterate some of the key points in those videos. If hell is a place of eternal torment, what crime or what sin did Jesus commit to spend 3 days in that place? It is interesting that he spent 3 days in his burial tomb. Please try to connect the dots. Think about that. He spent 3 days in his burial tomb. It wasn't where he spent 3 days in his burial tomb and he spent an additional day or 3 days in hell. They're the same thing, people. The burial tomb or the grave is the same thing as hell. Also consider what is written at Revelation chapter 20, verse 14. We read that both death and hell are thrown into something. Think about that. Death and hell together are thrown into the lake of fire. Death and hell are not persons. Death can't sin. Hell can't sin. So why are death and hell thrown into the lake of fire? Well, to understand what that means, one must go a few verses down to Revelation chapter 21, verse 4. And there the Apostle John writes that there will be no more death. Why is that? Because he just wrote at Revelation chapter 20, verse 14, that death is thrown into the lake of fire. So if death will be no more because it is thrown into the lake of fire, what does that make the lake of fire? It makes the lake of fire a symbol of being no more, or a symbol of non-existence. Anything thrown into the lake of fire will cease to exist. Now, let's go back to Revelation chapter 20, verse 14, where the Apostle John writes, and I reiterate, that death and hell are thrown into the lake of fire. So if hell is thrown into the lake of fire, that means that one day hell will be no more, just like death. Connect the dots. Also, 99% of the time, whenever you read about death and hell mentioned together, they're mentioned together. In other words, you can't have one mentioned without the other. Death and hell. Why is that? Because when a person dies, Jesus was no exception, they go into hell. They go into their grave. So if one day death will be no more because it's thrown into the lake of fire, that means that in the future, people will no longer die. If people will no longer die because death will be no more, there will be no need for what? Graves or hell. Hell is not a place of eternal torment. We must reason about that. Hell is not a place of eternal torment. We must reason about this. One must take out the emotional element with this teaching that hell is a place of eternal torment. Now, I take you to Romans chapter 6, verse 23. And there the Apostle Paul writes that the wages of sin, or the wages that sin pays, is death. Think about that, people. The wages that sin pays is death, not eternal torment. He also writes at Romans chapter 6, verse 7, that the one who has died has been freed from sin. In other words, at one's death, any sins that they will have committed in their lifetimes are erased by virtue of their deaths. In other words, their deaths, or our deaths, are full payment for any sins that we will have committed in our lifetimes, thanks to Jesus' sacrificial death. If it wasn't for his sacrificial death, that would not be possible. So when one is resurrected in that great day in the future, they will come out of their graves blameless, sinless, because our deaths will have paid for the sins that we will have committed in our lifetimes. The wise King Solomon wrote at Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verse 5, that as for the living, they know that they will die. And this is true. We know. Those of us who are living, we are very aware, we are conscious of the fact that one day we are going to stop breathing and we are going to die. Then he contrasts the dead with the living. He says, but as for the dead, they know nothing. They know nothing. Why is that? Because they're dead. So if hell is a place of eternal torment, then how can a person, according to what King Solomon wrote there in Ecclesiastes, how can dead persons be aware of pain, torture, and heat, fire? And doesn't fire require oxygen to burn? The dead know nothing. They're not aware of pain and torture if hell is a place of eternal torment. So the teaching that hell is a place of eternal torment, that's completely wrong. Now, I know many use the parable or the illustration Jesus gave of the rich man and the poor man Lazarus. That is not referring to a place of eternal torment. In that parable, Jesus is teaching about the mindset and condition of the rich in his day and the poor. The wealthy back in Jesus' day, which were the Jewish elite, surrounded themselves with all their wealth, and they had servants and slaves. And they looked down on and they despised the poor. The poor would gladly take what the rich threw out, as far as garbage, the crumbs from their table. Even the dogs treated the poor better than the rich elite. And that's while both of them were alive. That is, the rich man and Lazarus. Now understand that the rich man represents a class of people who are wealthy, and the poor man Lazarus represents the poor and the despised. Now, in that parable, both the rich man and Lazarus, the poor man, were alive. They both died. Now things change. You see, the rich man could not take with him all of his wealth. The poor man didn't have anything in the first place. God favored the despised poor man, Lazarus. And the rich man found himself in another condition. You see, he couldn't take his wealth with him into the grave. Now, all of a sudden, he wanted God's favor. He wanted God's attention. He wanted the same attention that God had given the despised poor man, Lazarus. And so people are reading this parable and they're thinking that this rich man is in a place of eternal torment that they call hell, a fiery place. But they fail to understand that Jesus is giving a parable. He's not talking about a literal place or a literal event. It's a learning tool. Jesus used parables and illustrations to teach. I've done that when I was teaching. Now, the rich man asked God to send Lazarus, who's in a favored position with God. That's what it means, being in the bosom position of Abraham or God. But the rich man asked God to send Lazarus with a drop of water on his finger to place on his tongue to cool his tongue. Think about that. Does that make sense? Why would the rich man ask God to send Lazarus with a drop of water on his finger? Why not ask for a raging river to be poured into that place? But he asked for a drop of water. And if hell was a place of intense heat, there's no way Lazarus could even get close to that place and get close to that rich man to place a drop of water on his tongue. The water itself would evaporate and Lazarus would burn up. You see, so that doesn't make sense for individuals to use that parable as proof that hell is a place of eternal torment. Lazarus being in the bosom position of Abraham or God means that he's in a position where in the future, God is going to remember him. Lazarus is in God's heart, and God is going to remember him on that great resurrection day in the future. Now, that rich man who's dead, he'll also be resurrected. But he will not be in a favored position when he's resurrected. He will have to earn and work out his salvation to eternal life. The poor man Lazarus class already has that. So when they are resurrected in the future, they will not have to work out their salvation. At their resurrections, they're automatically granted eternal life, and they will be in the minority. What I'm saying here is that the poor man class will be a minority in the future. The rich man class will be a vast majority. The vast majority of all the people who have been born in Earth's history, when they're resurrected, that includes Adam, they'll have to work out their salvation, that is, prove themselves worthy of eternal life. They will have to go through what is called the Great Tribulation. And those in the rich man class, they will be a part of the second resurrection. Those who are part of the first resurrection are of the Lazarus class. And no one today knows who they are. They haven't arrived yet. And the reason why is that the great resurrection is still yet future. So those who are part of the first resurrection, yes, they'll go through the Great Tribulation. And if they die, they will be brought back to life again. They represent also the two witnesses mentioned in the book of Revelation. So the poor man class will not have to prove themselves faithful with regards to eternal life. They will have acted accordingly in the future, going through Christ's 1,000 years and coming out of that and going into the kingdom of the beast, which will surface after Christ, yet a future 1,000-year kingdom will have ended. This is written at Revelation chapter 20, verse 7 and 8. They'll go through that beastly kingdom that Satan will establish on the earth in future days. It will be within the beast, that's a government, a kingdom, and that's written in Revelation. The beast is a kingdom. It is a throne. It is Satan's throne that he will establish on the earth. And it will be within that throne, that kingdom, that the Great Tribulation will occur, and also Armageddon. Armageddon occurs after the Great Tribulation. And Armageddon is not World War III, because all of the nations we know of today will not exist when all that begins. Armageddon is not even a war. We are not told in Revelation chapter 16 verse 10 that Armageddon is a war. We're told that Armageddon is a place. Many might use the expression, the War of Armageddon. That will be incorrect. Armageddon is the place, the turf, where a spiritual battle will be raised between two kingdoms. A kingdom that will be coming down, and Satan knows it will be coming down in those future days, and the kingdom that he will establish on the earth. That's the spiritual battle, because Satan, through his beastly kingdom, will have conditioned the masses, whose numbers cannot even be counted, to believe that the beast, or the throne of the beast, is invincible. As it is written at Revelation chapter 13, verse 2 down through 4, who is like the beast, is what the people will say. Who can wage war against it? So the people in those future days who are citizens of Satan's kingdom and throne, that is the beast, will believe that that throne, that kingdom, is invincible, or will be invincible, and that nothing can come up against it. Not even God's kingdom that will be coming down in those future days. So before I get off track here, I want you to understand that hell is not a place of eternal torment. Hell is simply the place that we all go when we die. Jesus was no exception. His friend Lazarus, that he resurrected after he had spent some 5 days in his tomb, when Lazarus was resurrected, Lazarus didn't come back saying that he was in a place of eternal torment. He didn't say that he was in heaven either. Why? Because as King Solomon said, the dead know nothing. So Lazarus had no reports of where he was at when he was dead for those 5 days. So I raise these points because when I have conversations with Christians who believe that hell is a place of eternal torment, what I notice with almost 100% of them, they get all emotional and unreasoning because I bring up these points that they have no answers to, because they want so badly to believe. You see, that's all emotionalism, that hell is a place of eternal torment. That is not true. The scriptures that I raised, and I can break up a whole lot of them, about hell not being a place of eternal torment, they find very painful. And so they ignore them and try to change the subject. And they make me the subject. Now they have a subject that is me that they can talk about, and what's a word I'm looking for here, and drag a red herring across and smear and try to discredit. Now they can try with all their might, but those scriptures are still there, staring them in the face. And that is what many of them find very painful. It'd be much easier for me to go away in their minds, because they don't have to hear it. And if they don't have to hear me bring up these points as I just did, then there's no need for them to provide an answer. So is hell a place of eternal torment? No. Hell is simply the grave.